And I think, things to alleviate our fear is to recognize that these drugs, or let me say these bugs resistant to drugs, actually are not stronger. I know this is almost heresy to say, because they're super bugs. It's the way the media portrays these things. And yes, they're super in relation to the antibiotic designed to kill them. They're super. They're impenetrable. They turn into little, pathogenic supervillains, but not in relation to things of the natural world. And I've mentioned some of these things here. I'm not here to sell products. I'm just here to share the information that in the natural world there are botanicals, there are even, metals that are non-toxic in proper forms that can help us to counteract a microbial burden, a pathogenic burden, of which we all may potentially carry. I mean, heck, if we really look at it, the Savage Nation audience could go right now and get a strep test, right? If they still do them this way, they'll put a little swab of the throat, they'll put it in a petri dish to see what grows, and pretty much everybody will test positive for some streptococcus bacteria. They'll call that the strep throat infection. But I'll hazard a guess, and it's a good one, that the vast majority of the Savage Nation audience right now listening to us do not suffer from a strep throat infection, yet have strep bacteria present in the throat. How is that possible? Why is that possible? Well, that goes back to the heart of the law of the terrain, that when you're basically healthy, you keep things in check. There are more microbes in our body than we have cells in our body, and yet we all survive. How is that possible? Unless there is a symbiosis, there is a way to work together when we are healthy, when we provide the healthy soil.
Right.
Much like those small organic family farmers that are looking to rehab the soil, get the nutrients in there available for the food that they grow so that the food is healthy and it provides and sustains life. It's not rocket science, as I say. This is basic stuff. But in our arrogance and somewhat our ignorance, we think, oh, well, we can do better. Let's throw some nitrogen pellets down there. It's the same thing. We're not making bombs with it now. We'll throw it on the soil. And, of course, it disrupts the normal balance of how nutrients are made available via earthworm, breaking down these things, these complex molecules into ever simpler forms for the body to, assimilate them via the food that they eat. And so where do we go? Do we rely on synthetic chemistry? Do we rely on the way nature has worked ever since there's been nature, by that which created us all? And then we've got more absurdities now. Remember the pandemic that never was, the H1N1 swine flu. Oh, my gosh. You know what the World Health Organization did, Michael?
What's happening now?
Just recently, they declared it over. It's over. We're all going to live.
You don't say, really?
And it's really kind of funny if you think about it, because their own pronouncement, they acknowledge 18,000 deaths worldwide in over a year due to the H1N1. But think about it. Wait a second. Isn't it our own Centers for Disease Creation? I mean, Centers for Disease Control. I always get them mixed up. Says that there are 36,000 deaths annually just in the United States under a year, every year. 36,000. So they claim less than half of that. Less than half of those deaths globally, not just in the worldwide, for the H1N1. How is that a pandemic? And even I would argue that the 36,000 referenced by CDC is a gross exaggeration when you really look at the true death rate to influenza, and not just complications of people who are already ill.
Well, sure, okay.
So how does a bigger than normal super epidemic pandemic flu kill only half as many worldwide as occurs in just one nation every year from the little old regular flu, Michael? And at the end of the link, when we talk about the CDC, and in this case the World Health Organization pronouncement, Chan, their spokesperson, in her exchange with journalists, also raised the specter of an even deadlier flu pandemic in the future.
No.
Oh, yes, that's right. Since H1N1 was a dud, guess what they're going to bring back? The sequel, H5N1. That's right, they say, and I quote here, lurking in the background, we still have H5N1, Chan said, a reference to the bird flu strain that has infected 503 people over 7 years. But not even statistically relevant, and they claim killed 300, which would be, of course, a brutal death rate to that. But, of course, it never went wide like they promised, like they said, like they feared us into, accepting experimental medicines and vaccines. So be afraid. Be very afraid. Not really, of course, when you see through these pronouncements. And thank God for the media and talk radio and even the Internet to get this kind of information out there, so that we don't fall prey to those with conflicts of interest. Oh, and did you hear this? They admitted massive conflicts of interest that are happening out there. The World Health Organization reveals H1N1 experts' industry ties. including Nancy Cox from the U.S. CDC. She disclosed financial support from drug industry groups. She was on the advisory committee for WHO, and that was a vaccine thing she was promoting. Arnold Monto, a professor of epidemiology at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, also was researching into influenza vaccines for GSK, Novartis, Roche, Baxter, and Sanofi Pasteur. Got grants. Dr. John Woods, research unit at the National Institute for Biological Standards and Control, a center of the UK Health Protection Agency, also performed contractual research for Sanofi Pasteur, CSL, and others. Professor Marion Zambon of the UK Health Protection Agency Center also worked with Novartis, CSL, Sanofi, Baxter, GSK in her laboratory. And Professor Neil Morris Ferguson acted as a consultant for pharmaceutical firms Roche and GSK Biologicals.
How could this be going on?
These are the people that are dictating policy at WHO, and it's the same scenario as we find it at CDC and FDA, and they pretend conflicts of interest don't matter. I don't believe it. Do you? And, of course, the pandemic that never was, at least it's finally over. And wrapping up this, actually, I talk about a 100-year war. Do you know what Obama did last week? He sent out emails. In fact, if you're on his email list, you got this.
What did it say?
Listen to this quote from Barack Obama. "We fought for and won historic reforms to our healthcare system. A victory 100 years in the making." Michael, this is interesting. He referenced 100 years of victory, 100-year victory in the making. What was he referring to? Of course, Savage Nation listeners are savvy to this because we've covered it, Michael. It's the Flexner Report of 1910, the Rockefeller-inspired and funded, preordained report that was intended to wipe out all competition to petrochemical pharmaceutical medicine. The Flexner Report 100 years ago, 1910, now we are at 2010. I don't know if Obama actually knows what he wrote or if somebody wrote this for him, but somebody in there knows exactly what they've been doing. I call the 20th century the century that we descended into pharmaceutical tyranny, into the 21st, and Obama admits it. And you've heard it first right here on the Savage Nation. Drug resistance, I think that should be the people resisting the drugs, not the resistance of the microbes, which was inevitable. My feeling is that we should not seek permission to do that which is our birthright. Unless you think you're owned by big government, then, of course, their permission for you to refuse drugs is required if they own you. But your doctor, by virtue of his license, is technically owned by government because they've asked permission to do that, which I believe is a birthright, healing. And I realize that they say freedom is too dangerous. Too dangerous. Of course, it's the elitists, the global elitists that want the one world order. They don't want freedom.
Well, thanks for the report, Robert.
Thanks again, Michael. Always great to be with you on the Savage Nation with this message of health, freedom, and liberty. Please urge your listeners to go to robertscottbell.com and plug into all this and more, for freedom is on the line.
I'll be right back. Savage.